All right, welcome. We are here with Rob Freed, the Senior Vice President of Forensics from Sandline Global. Rob, thanks so much for taking time. I know you're busy. I know you've jumped from call to call today, but thanks. And why don't you give us a little intro to yourself and a little bit about your journey into forensics?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you, Justin, for the opportunity to be part of the podcast. I know we've been talking for a little while about getting me on here and definitely have enjoyed the interaction. My journey is one that is very interesting in that I've been in the industry for 22 years this year, and I came in through academics. I was a forensic science major at the University of New Haven in Connecticut, where I was studying human based forensics. So we did everything from criminalistics to DNA to fingerprints to forensic photography. You name it, it was all covered crime scene investigation. And then I was working at Gateway Computers. They used to have stores all over the place.
Yeah.
And I used to come into class with my Gateway, shirt on and looked all, proper for going into work after class. And I was actually pretty successful at selling computers. We were doing it, they had this store. Normally you'd buy it online and it'd be shipped to your house. Well, you still shipped it to the clients. That was interesting when you had to deal with like all the people that came in right before Christmas, to like get this computer underneath the tree, and you're like, sorry, it's going to take about 7 to 10 business days, but it was a great experience. And then my the dean of my university actually started getting involved with computer forensics classes, which he had offered on campus and also online at the time. I started taking them, and he's like, "Hey, you look like you're really good with computers. You're working at Gateway. How would you like to learn a little bit more about this program? I'm also establishing a master's program." He went on to establish a master's program in national security as well. So I actually joined that program. I flew out to California for a year, got a master's in advanced forensic investigation with a certificate program in computer forensics, studying under the likes of Dr. Fred Cohen and Mr. Fred Cotton. I always get confused between Kevin Manson was in there, just a whole bunch of different people that I was very fortunate to get exposure to very early on. And, it was a great hands-on experience with practitioners and residents. I went on and found really a lot of interest in that, field, in that discipline, where I was actually doing an internship, a graduate internship with the Search Group in Sacramento, and wanted to get back to the East Coast. So I looked for opportunities. I signed up with the National White Collar Crime Center as a computer crime specialist trainee, working with some of my old colleagues that are really, really good friends now, even to this day. And the rest is history, and how I was able to train law enforcement from local, state, federal, and now getting into the private sector and consulting, wanting to stay in New York and do this work. So it's been really quite the journey, quite the career, and I'm very fortunate to have met all the people throughout my career that have been really mentors and advocates for me, knowing I came in from a private, university, in the private sector, not public sector based, with that mentality, learning a little bit about all that was involved with digital forensics, and then being able to do it in the private sector for large multinational companies and working with the largest law firms in the world right now.
Oh, man, that's awesome. Funny little story. My very first computer that was mine, I guess, was a gift from my parents, and we bought it at a Gateway store in my hometown. And yeah, it had to be shipped out, but it wasn't like a time sensitive thing. And I remember just all the cow marked boxes showing up and having to assemble it and everything. Big CRT monitor. I'm trying to
Yeah.
think, like, I think at the time my hard drive was 40 gig, maybe only 20 when
Yeah.
I first got it. And I remember in taking it to college a few years later and upgrading it like double, like either to 40 or 80. I can't remember which way it went, but different times. But yeah, gateway stores, they used to be in kind of every strip mall, back in the day.
It
So
was fascinating because it was like mail order, catalog originally. And you had two key players. You had Gateway and you had Dell. And the funny story is when people came in and like, do you sell, Gateway and Dell here? And I was like, get the Dell out of here. Meaning, like this is Gateway. Take a look
yeah.
at this product. You got a chance to configure it on the fly with them. And it was terrific. It was a great experience. I have, friends even from that time. And we were all kind of technologists, really enjoying selling a product that was really at that point, you got a chance to customize a product and be able to bring it, into your home and learn it and learn Windows and, Microsoft products. And it allowed me to really find a way for me to enjoy technology as well as pick up a skill.
Yeah. I think, I got that computer in 2001 and it was not thrown away until I want to say it might 2017, 2016, because it was just handed through. Like I gave it to my grandparents because all they needed was to access the web. That thing lived forever. And yep, Gateway built a solid machine, man. That thing held on for a long time. So
Yeah, and the kind of knowledge and skill set developed over time. My dad had brought home a 486 DX2 66. I remember it. We were really excited, right? Put it into the family room, and the first night I went to go use the computer, I think at that point it was like the San Diego Zoo was one of the CDs that came with it, and it was Windows 3.11. And for whatever reason, I clicked on the window and it minimized the window. And then all of a sudden, my dad came downstairs. He's like, "What did you do? I can't see the screen now. Where's everything?" And that was the first thing to say to me, like, "Hey, look, I need to really know how to use this because
yeah.
it's a little bit different than the Apple IICs that we had at the school where we were like moving the turtle around and figuring out all the ways to get that turtle to move." So I really, from that moment on, I was like, hey, I really need to learn how to use this. I really, this seems like an interesting thing to get into. And from that point, I got very involved with it. I learned how to use it. I learned how to use the technology in terms of how people were talking to each other, and just all the software installation, stacks of floppy disks to get Windows or Office installed. And you really just grew up with an appreciation of, where we were and where we are today, starting to get online with the bulletin board services at that point, and being able to understand that if somebody picked up the phone, you were knocked off. Today, that's a thing of the past. People don't even remember those days.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that it taught you those skills because same way for me, my parents got me this computer. It was assemble it, figure out how it works, all that sort of stuff. And I'm going to kind of use that as a segue to your most recent book that I think was just released last month, right?
Yes.
Last
Yes.
month. So Forensic Data Collections 2.0, a selection of trusted digital forensics content. There we go.
There you
Second
go. It's
edition.
even on
You got a
my
little pin.
pin. Yeah.
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 I, uh, I've listened to it. I'll be honest. I listened to it on the Audible,
Yes.
and the things you just discussed are the things that are covered in the book. Oddly enough, I have
Yeah.
in that I was joking with you before. Did you ever think about calling it, forensic data collections, the soft skills? Because that's kind of the trend. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of this second edition, but also I want to talk about soft skills as well.
So One of the things that is really fascinating about digital forensics, right? And I think you can appreciate it too, is that, we are in an industry that, has a lot of foundation in law enforcement, in technology, right? The whole idea of forensics is the application of science to law, right? So there's a lot of foundation there. In terms of, what I've written and how I write things and why I write things is because we have to really understand that the technology is one aspect of it. The technology is always going to, advance, right? We're a society that everybody wants to have the latest and greatest and the most convenient things. And, with that comes a lot of interesting things. I mean, part of the idea of me putting this next book out was to show the evolution of where we were 50 years ago, right, to where we are now. The book opens up, and I think it's not covered under the audio section. However, I brought in people like Vince Cerf, like Bob Kahn, who actually created the TCP/IP protocol, which is the foundation of how we handshake between data and get connected. Really, because that set the foundation for all the things, and they developed those protocols in a way for people to build on top of that. I also had the fortunate opportunity to connect up with, Steve Crocker and, John Clenson, who these are the developers of the RFC, the request for comments, how information was shared in the early days of building this technology, this architecture, and then also how we wound up transferring data. So, for example, the file transfer protocol, where John Clenson, was involved with that, and so I have a really keen interest in understanding how data evolved over time and how these individuals actually played a key factor in that evolution. I also brought in Lee Felsenstein, who actually designed the personal computer, because I said, in an age where technology was flourishing and these individuals were coming up with technology, how did they all collaborate in a way that they were trying to figure out how to make the technology even more accessible to, to be able to take it on the road with you? And Lee had shared stories about how he was in the, the home brewing club with Steve Jobs and, Wozniak, and all these intermingling between all these experts that we think about today that have really shaped our society, right? So the technology is one side of it. And then you have to think about, well, how are we using the technology in our everyday in terms of investigations, in our litigation, and things like that? And people are ultimately intimidated by the technology. Not everybody has the same skill set to understand what it is we're trying to get, how we're trying to get it, and what the ultimate goal is. The ultimate goal is to take data from one place and put it into another place without impacting the integrity of it. And that could be the data itself, the date and time associated with it, right? Maintain a chain of custody to show how it got from point A to point B throughout the course of this, and then ultimately bring it into a courtroom and say, hey, I used a reputable organization to collect this data. Here's the chain of transfer of possession. Here's where the data resides. And this is how we're going to use it and talk about it in this courtroom. A lot of that has to do with getting everybody on board to take it from point A to point B, to feel comfortable enough that this person that you've hired, or this person coming into your, infrastructure, your home, whoever it is to be doing this work, is able to take it and make sure that everybody's comfortable along the way, even down to the sensitivity now, the hypersensitivity as it relates to data privacy, okay, and data security, which everything is going into the cloud right now, but there are some people that don't even want to think about the cloud. So how do you tell those people, we're not going to put your data in the cloud. We're going to save it onto target media, and it's going to go from my computer, your computer, to the target media, to a evidence locker, and it's going to be stowed away, and only certain people are going to access it, review it, and I'll ultimately produce it for that judge and your attorneys and the attorneys to see.
Right. It's it's so important. I think so. Let me rewind a little bit. The technology half, I think, is where we kind of get stuck focusing so much on, because let's be honest, it's and you're not doing that, but it's, we're not diminishing the importance of the technology. But if you can't explain what you just did, what you just looked at, and why it matters to them, all the other stuff is pointless. Like it just, it's that kind of thing where we joke that preservation is the most important part of an investigation, but then you could easily make the argument reporting is, and they're all important, of course. But again, if you can't communicate it, then no matter how good your work was, it kind of doesn't matter. And I felt like that was a lot of the takeaways from each of the chapters. Yes, you talked about the technology, but what I liked was here's some helps on how you can communicate it to a non-technical audience. So,
And we all understand things differently, and we all can appreciate differently, right? The way that a private investigator is going to think about evidence is different than a forensic scientist who's going to be focused in on evidence handling and other aspects of it, versus a law enforcement officer who has to protect the scene, wait for somebody to come pick it up, make sure that nobody's entering the scene, maintaining chain of custody. Then the technician's got to come in and bag and tag it just like you would physical evidence. And there's all these different ways that people think about things. And that's also the reason why I produced the book in different formats, right? People learn by way of, listening. They learn in terms of, digital ebooks. They learn in terms of hardcover. Some attorneys say, I don't like, soft cover. I like hardcover books. Some people say I like soft cover books. I thought of every which way to make the data or the information that I'm giving accessible to everybody. And I've also kept it relatively inexpensive. I mean, how many books can you buy today in audiobook format that are $6, right? How many books can you buy today that are giving you topics, 21 topics that is under, you can go buy, you can't buy lunch in New York
I know.
for $12 these days. And you're getting content that has spent 20 years of my life devoted to this. I live, breathe, and sleep this stuff. I wake up every day motivated to come in, figure out how we're going to solve problems of our clients. And I've been very fortunate enough to now have a team that I lead every day with this same idea that we're going to have a different approach, in how we're going to do things potentially. And these are the steps that we're going to follow. We're always going to follow foundational steps. We're not going to jump into something. We're going to think about it so that it can be done in a methodical way. But the next person who sees this is going to be able to take that information and do something with it, right? So I can't tell you how many examiners that I've seen work from that don't use the notes section of an image file, right? I have seen so many different things in there, but I've always been taught make, model, serial number, person whose computer it is, jumper settings, you know, um, folders that you've targeted. That's your place to tell people your interaction with that. And, it is discoverable, but you're providing a service to clients. You're providing a service to the person who you're imaging that computer, that image can be exchanged between other examiners, and people will understand what it is that was imaged, where it came from. It'll even show the labels that are on there. It will give people a little bit of a picture versus going through so many different hoops to get information, right? So as we're starting to get more advanced and we're getting more complex as an industry, we have to remember that documentation, our chain of custody, the way that we're, representing ourselves, our company needs to be where you go that extra step, you go that extra mile, take the extra couple minutes and put that in there, not only for your sake that you're going to be asked a question about it
Yeah.
5 years down the road, but for the next examiner who's going to say, you know what? That guy Rob was pretty solid. Look what he put in here for me. That's pretty solid because now I can take it and I don't have to do too much guessing.
And yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing about the 5 year wait, but also thinking about some large multi investigator cases you've worked. A bunch of images are coming through. What are the images? Where do they come from? All that information. And yeah, I could go talk to Rob, but if you just put it in the image file, it's fast, it's readily available, it's verifiable, and it's like you said, it's going to travel with that image, making
And
things so
we're
easy.
we're in a an age where people don't stay at jobs for their
Yeah,
entire career. You know,
yeah,
may have moved on. And I may not be accessible. And how I leave my digital footprint inside my quality of work, that I'm producing, my work product, is a reflection not just of the company that I work for, but of me, because that may span other jobs that I wind up having or my colleagues have that, what, this is from 5, 6 years ago. Well, this is something that you did. I have a friend that, was a detective in NYPD, called me up last year. He's not obligated, I think, to go and testify, but his work product is being looked at, and he may be asked a question. Hey, can you come and testify on what you did? And I know his work product. I know what he does, and he keeps very detailed notes. Got some of the best handwriting I've ever seen. And these are people that are willing to go the extra mile because they know what they've done. They have good memory of it, but they also had good documentation at the time. If you have good documentation, that's your key to success. The key to success in forensics, in e-discovery, is your responsiveness and the ability to keep organized and documented so that it doesn't matter if something happens along the way, you can always explain it based on the notes that you take. Now, do you want to be overly verbose on your chain of custody? No. Do you want to be, writing down every, the temperature outside is 94 degrees, right? I'm at whatever 23 degrees latitude. No, it's a matter of what's important. Now, there's a big group of kind of discussions that I was in about this forensic acquisition form, and I talk about it in my book. Different forms that are part of chain of custody. Now, if you remember, we had the LBA, right, and then
mhm,
we also had the CHS addressing.
right.
Well, if you look at the hard drive label, you have both a CHS address and you have an LBA. Do you really need the CHS address? Well, every hard drive has a different, firmware slash manufacturing. Uh, not every hard drive, although it's the same or same model or whatever, is built on the same batch, and there
Yeah.
may be some little nuances that happen even in the hard drives or in the laptops that you buy. The more documentation that you have that uniquely identifies your piece of evidence that you're looking at will help you explain exactly what you had done and why you had done it. What jumper settings was it on? Do you have that information these days? That may not be important on the e-discovery case, but if you're now dealing with a investigation that turns into something that is now in the national headlines, and you're going against other examiners, and this becomes a really contentious issue, then you're on the hook. And don't just feel that because you're an analyst or you're an associate and you're doing some of the heavy lifting of doing the imaging and things like that, that you are, excluded from testifying, right? Even at the more junior levels, there may be an instance where something, needs to be addressed, that those individuals need to be, uh, talked to, and how they do their notes, how they complete their documentation is important. Take those extra few seconds and complete your data collection log, your chain of custody, your forensic acquisition form. Those are all fundamental to the cases that you're working on.
Absolutely. Even for, and you mentioned this on and off, our corporate investigations, how long can a legal, how many times do you talk to somebody, hey, we're just preserving this in the off chance that this legal hold happens and they leave, or what? And those images, those collections can sit for a very long time. And then compound that with maybe the IT guy slash forensic slash security guy has taken another position or another job. Now, why was this collected? What was collected? When was it like, you got to have that.
I wrote an interesting article about evidence management with Ryan Parthmore, a very good friend, former student of mine at NW3C, who been fortunate to collaborate. He's worked in state crime labs and forensics labs, and we always talk about what is the true shelf life of a CD or a DVD or of a hard drive. What's the resiliency of a hard drive that unfortunately mistakes happen, that somebody bumps into it while taking it out of the evidence locker and it falls down to the ground. What are the things that you're doing from an evidence handling standpoint to protect the integrity of the evidence that you're the data custodian of while it's in your possession? Are you maintaining power while a cell phone is being brute forced, so that over the course of time that um, that process can be maintained, can continue on, right? I mean, all these things are really important, just as much as what's on the media, or just the media itself. What's on the media can be impacted by how you handle the evidence.
Yeah. I want to shift gears just a touch. We've been talking about an examiner's output. Now I want to talk a little bit about the input. One thing that you said when we were talking earlier off camera was an investigator grows through active listening. And I really like that. And a lot of that is covered in various portions of the book here. Can you just expand on what did you mean by an investigator grows through active listening?
So active listening is a very, very important skill, right? I think my dad always told me, God's given us two ears and one mouth, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's something to be said when you're dealing with a lot of emotions in this industry. People, you're not going into a lot of these situations with like, hey, I'm here to help you out, here to, do some great work. People are calling you because there's a problem. You have to listen to what your client's saying, what the other side is saying. And, one of the first times I've actually had a chance to help both parties out was a special master. And you have to go in with a neutral mindset. Here you are, you're helping the arbitrator out. And, what does that mean? It's not so important for you to be the person who has the most knowledge on the call, because usually you're not. You're not involved in these businesses day to day. You're not a stakeholder in there. Those people are in those businesses sometimes for 20, 30 years. I've worked on broiler chicken cases. Those people have been with those companies for 40 years. This is what they do on a day to day. What's your job coming into this? I'm not going to be able to come into an organization and understand how they do things within 5 minutes, of the call. I have to listen to, number one, what it is that we're looking to do, who are the key players, and then work really closely with those people over the time period that I have to make sure that I've identified and I've preserved, meaning don't want that stuff to get destroyed, and then wind up collecting it. I don't do that through talking so much that everybody could be like, oh, here's Rob. He's coming in. He's coming. Let me go give Rob the keys to the kingdom here and get all the data out. No, you have to hear everybody's concerns. You have to build rapport. You're going into organizations that are multi-million dollars, sometimes $1 billion, strict, processes to get data looked at, hospital systems, government entities, loyalty beyond belief. These are people who are really committed to their companies. And what is it going to take for them to give you the access to what they have, that their day to day is? You're not coming to take their job. You're here to help them. You need to listen to everybody's concerns. You need to understand what your goal is, to say, listen, I don't know what's on your phone. I could care less about, your family photos and everything else. Our job is to sift through and get the data identified. Here's what we're going to do to protect your data, and then just filter out and find the data that's relevant. And we're going to move forward. It's listening to everybody. It's learning about how things work. You don't learn a lot when you're the guy who's constantly having to feel like you need to drive the conversation. The conversation's going to be driven well when everybody feels that you've got their best interest in mind, and when you chime in and say, well, yeah, you have this BYOD policy, but what apps do you use to communicate with your family, so that we know that when we see that, we can immediately start thinking like, hey, that's not important here. You know, give people the ability to tell you what's on their mind, what's important to them, and then reflect back on what your scope of work is, what the ultimate goal is, and then give that information, not in a condescending or, authoritative way, in a confident way that builds trust, and that ultimately will help you be successful.
I actually had a case a number of years ago, even in the law enforcement setting. There was something that went down in the high schools, and there was a student who was messaged some, what we'll just call it, evidence, and she was willing to, hey, this is what happened, this was what was sent. We had to get it off of her cell phone though. And so this was handled by my supervisors, but I was the examiner. Her and her mom came in and sat down at my desk with me as we extracted the data, and we were able to just walk through the whole process with them. All right, I got to plug in your phone. This is called, we were using Celebrite at the time. This is a Celebrite. We're going to, and we walked through every piece of the thing, and then we popped it up into Physical Analyzer. And I was like, okay, you walk me through now at this point, like, what app should we look at? Here's the list, and we just went very granular through, so that in this case, it was basically putting them in control. I was just explaining what needed to happen. We were able to get the text messages and the pictures. I showed them, okay, now we're going to extract just this group, and showed the output. We then unplugged it, and due to the way that we were preserving and the type of case, I was able to get rid of the whole dump because I had my exported stuff. It was just the way that it was working with that, and sent them on their way. And they had what they told me. I mean, they could have lied. They had a good experience. It was all comfortable, and we got what we needed. They felt safe and secure, and were able to move on. And I think you're absolutely right. That communication, that listening, that working with your client, whether it is the important part.
There's a lot of psychological component to this aspect of the work now, right? I think in law enforcement, you're addressing you sometimes heated moments. People may not give you access to their devices. They may not want to help. Remember one story where somebody, was saying, oh, you need access to my phone through my fingerprint. Like, a couple of minutes later, wound up, figuring out how to, you know, impact their fingerprint to not get at. I mean, people, this is a high, no matter what it is, who it is, it's a highly emotionally charged event. I mean, you and I, we are sometimes on the other side of this, and you have to put yourself in those people's shoes. What does it mean, even though it's a corporate asset, right? People still have a personal connection. I can tell you about all the biological stuff that's on their keyboard on that personal level, right? When people are using it and they got all their food and everything else. But, there are people that don't have computers at home and that they use this corporate asset as their, main computer. And so I remember having a custodian who, needed to drop off the computer to me. And it was like, okay, I don't get involved with any of this stuff, but you have personal stuff on here. I'm going to be, doing what I need to do as per the direction of your employer. But, if you have any questions, please speak to your employer. And it was a matter of like, hey, what are your policies in terms of, technology usage in the company, where you're, putting personal stuff on there? And what does that mean? And there's even on a corporate device, there's an emotional component, right? Somebody's looking at stuff that you do on a day to day. Somebody's studying you. A lot of people don't have an appreciation of the fact that we're not looking at every single thing that you're doing. We're looking at getting this in a format that it can be reviewed, and only a subset after keyword searching and date calling and filtering, and look at, Xtero being able to bucket things in FTK and using different technology and techniques to be able to filter down things. And the reason why we do that across the board is it's a needle in a haystack, right? We're not always going to find that smoking gun. It takes a lot of skill. It takes art. It's science. It's an art. There's a lot involved in that process.
Absolutely. It's it's so I have two phones. It's funny, in your book, as you're reading through, you have a section on this BYOD versus corporate device thing. And I
Yeah.
was listening to that and I'm like, and I think one of the lines is it can be cumbersome. Yeah, it can be cumbersome to carry two phones, but I'm like, you know what? I just want to avoid the whole thing of this process because yes, not that I don't do any illegal stuff and like work I'm in compliance, but it's like you said, it's the art, or it's the feeling of people looking at you, studying you. I would just rather have all that off on a corporate thing where, listen, at least this. I think there was a case a few years ago where a woman was trying to stop her employer from taking her device because of personal stuff on there, just to prevent any whatever. I'll refrain from mentioning the company, but she was saying her nudes were on there and that they were taking it for corporate reasons. And my thought was, well, I had a lot of thoughts, but it was, if you have a BYOD policy, you're also running a risk if you combine those two as a user, because they can seize it depending on the policy or seize the data. So I think, we as examiners have to definitely apply our knowledge and skills as you laid out, but also as a user, as the end user, come on, if you're a BYOD, maybe control what you put on your phone as well. So I don't know,
Look
which
at
is a hard sell.
look at the last 3-4 years where people have transitioned into this hybrid role, where you've gone from working in a physical office where you've had printers and you have technology at your disposal. A lot of people use printers. A lot of people have different things like tablets that they're more comfortable with. Some people have different situations. And what do you sharing on your personal network? People were saying, "Hey, I can't get into my network anymore at work. The office is going to ship me an external hard drive. Hey, that external hard drive's got 1 terabyte. I need to back up some stuff, or hey, I got to plug in my iPhone into my computer because that's what I always do to charge it. I no longer have, my whole, docking station. And sure enough, your personal information from your phone is going onto your computer, and now it's like, okay, well, maybe Johnny, saw that mom's computer is there. It's got a USB port. Let me just plug it in. Or I really like mom's, iTunes music collection. Let me put that on my device. And like, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. And
Yeah.
companies haven't locked down USB ports. The smart ones had, there's a lot of this stuff where, how protected are corporate assets? How protected is your data? Do you really understand in the moment where you need to charge your phone or you need to print something out and your computer's right there, no matter what it is? People may take the liberty of doing that, keeping their taxes on this stuff. I mean, you name it, people do it because this is an available asset. And sometimes it's even a better, piece of equipment that they have at home.
Yeah. I do remember when Xterra locked down our USB drives. What a hassle. But I understand the security implications. But man, we had to rethink just how we did work because there's a contingent of us here at Xterra that have to have different types of machines. We call them unmanaged machines because FTK needs admin access and all that sort of stuff. So we have these other machines that can't connect to the corporate stuff and all this junk. I had to meet with IT to be like, how do I get the stuff off the drive that is public material for our images and our trainings to and we had to build this whole system to do that because no USBs, but absolutely necessary for protecting your corporate
You're
assets.
in an interesting division in that you work for a larger organization that may not always have the same connotation or the context of how you need to do your work. I have the same discussions. We have an IT team here with, multinational, I have to discuss how we're using technology in our corporate infrastructure to be able to say, this is why we need this. And, what's the business use case? What's the security impact? Even software that I'm purchasing now, what are the licensing agreements? How can we use that? What machines are needed? What technology is needed? So you all really have to work hand in hand to create these either sandbox environments or special use cases where you can kind of do what you need to do in your, with the end goal and the requirements or the backing of the company where you work.
Absolutely. On kind of piggybacking off of that, another thing we talked about was when referring to software and different things, we talked about the comparison of tool versus solution and how the investigator is the solution and the software is the tool. Can we expand on that a little bit? And I think it'll help when people talk about and think about what is their forensic or e-discovery software actually there for, the tool versus the solution.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting, right? The the software and I grew up in this space, so I was able to see the proliferation of tools over time. When I had first started, there were 1 or 2 tools to do computer analysis, and now there are tools that focus in on so many different ways. There's so connecting the dots is really a big part of what we do, and there's so many tools now that categorize, FTK included, that bucket our information. That those tools are, to me, all the same in what they're doing, just like an email client, right? An email client reaches out to the server and presents your email to you, the user, in many different ways. How you go about using your email and organizing and your rules is how it's based on your habits, your interests, and all that stuff, you as a user. When you think about forensic software and the variety of software that's out there, I buy multiple pieces of software to cross validate because I like to put on my eyeglasses, different ways to make sure number one, what I'm seeing in one tool is consistent in another tool. Or if it's not, I can question why is that so? And I can even go back to the developers. I work really hard to keep a really solid open communication with any of the providers that I purchase software with, to not only just look at it from a technical standpoint, but from a innovative standpoint, like this is what I'm seeing and things like that. You can buy, and these tools are expensive. Average forensic tool has gone from a few $1,000s over the years to now just shy of about $7,000 to $10,000. Those tools have developed over the course of time to get more sophisticated in how you're connecting the dots and what insights are out there. And I think even Celebrate's got a new tool called Insights, of what insights people are able to determine. The examiner has a responsibility to use those tools to interpret what the data is showing, right? And those are tools, but they're also a solution in that they have different ways that they can help you connect the dots. They have timelines, they have all these pieces of information. As an examiner, these tools, these solutions, you need to take what the information that it's giving to you, and you need to use your skill set and your investigative mindset to interpret those results. Just taking an Axiom export, an FTK or an EnCase export, and saying, this is what my tool gave me, is not going to really be helpful to a client that's not going to be tech savvy enough to be able to understand how a shortcut relates to a bunch of other information that you're presenting to them in a worksheet. You've got to take the time to take that solution, that tool, that solution, and make it into a situation where you tell the story. Because these tools are not, and we're dealing with AI now, and they can tell the story, but there's always got to be a human element that takes this information, and interprets it in a way to reconstruct events. And that's what forensics is. It's a series of tasks that we perform to reconstruct events, to be able to tell the story and ultimately bring the data that you got and that led you to those conclusions or those observations and bring it before a judge and a jury.
Yeah, you've got to be able to translate that and make it digestible. I think is the key. One thing, FTK does start at sub $3,000 though. No,
That's
no,
yeah.
but
There you
but
go.
it's so important to make, like you said, our software bundles it, makes it readable, because there's this joke, this saying that, I don't know if you know Alan Buxton.
None of it.
Uh, okay, he's a friend of mine, but he would always say, "Hey, you should be able to do forensics with a pencil and a hex editor, a
Yeah.
notepad, a hex editor, and a pencil, right?" And while I get the sentiment and I agree with it, nobody wants to do that. Nobody has the time for that. So we need to be able to leverage the software, and then we take over at that point. Like you said, the human element, the interpretation of that
I've gone
to
through
get it.
IASIS. I've taught NW3C courses, bits and bytes, right? The dirty bit, right? Nibbles,
Yeah.
being able to take from decimal to hex, to go from, hex to ASCII. Look, all that stuff allows you to understand. And I tell my coworkers, my team, that in order for you to be a good collector of data, you need to understand the impact of your actions at all the different levels, because the stuff that's happening before us is all GUI based. It looks as simple as, point and click. We call it what, Nintendo forensics, right?
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good term.
but what you got underneath the hood, no matter if I'm using FTK, NCase, X-Ways, Forensic Explorer. I mean, am I giving a pitch to everybody right now? Every tool, Ep3 from Paraben, right? These are all tools that take the data and they interpret it in their own way to make it a way that the examiner who's used these tools for sometimes decades understands what the data that they're looking at and how they can kind of piece everything together, right? So there's a human element to it. Again, all this stuff going on with AI, it can do a lot of things for you, but you have to have that human element. I always talk about this with APHIS, right? In my first book, I created two editions of this. I had Ralph Friedman. He's a legendary NYPD detective. This is a guy, and the reason why I connected with him, he's fascinating in that his entire career was not based on technology. He was a beat cop that didn't have technology. I think he worked on the first implementation of the 911 systems, but otherwise, he was walking around. They didn't have anything really, that allowed them to communicate with each other, right? And his whole career was based on not using any type of technology. It was based on the foundations. And APHIS, right? I bring it up in my paper with him in my article, that APHIS allows us to look at the automated fingerprint identification system, look at fingerprints. It can help you match a fingerprint to a certain point, but then there's an examiner that needs to say, here are the 10 minutiae that match the 10-point system, and this is an examiner signing off on that. If you don't have that same mentality and you're just relying on spitting out reports in spreadsheet format from Celebrite, from Axiom, from FTK, you need to take a step back and say, how is my client going to look at this deliverable and make sense of it? Take that extra time, leave your personal footprint, fingerprint on that work, make that Rob Fried's work product, make that Justin Tolman's work product, and walk away and sleep well knowing at night that you're not just giving information, you're interpreting it, you're helping people come to an understanding as to what you have provided them. And it will go a long way now, it'll go a long way into your future. And I've always taken the time to give that extra couple minutes of my time to say, why am I being brought in? What's important to the client? And ultimately, are they going to get frustrated when they see this from me? Because if they're going to ask questions, I didn't do my job. If I give them snippets, bullet points in my email or over the phone, and I give them enough information for them to understand it and to say, I took the time to do that, you'll have a client for life.
That's a fantastic point. I appreciate that. This is not something we prepped for, so I'm putting you on the spot, but it's a thought I had while you were talking. So I agree wholeheartedly with that. And my primary days of examination were definitely in the time where Detective Freed would bring me all the stuff he seized at the house. I would work all the digital aspect of it with the information he would give me, and I would give it back to him. The current meta or trend right now in both corporate and law enforcement is tending towards portable cases, like kind of a fire and forget mentality. With what you just talked about putting your stamp on it, making sure that you have the proper, work put in and have done the fundamentals, what's kind of your off the hip, because I didn't allow you to prepare, opinion of this new meta or trend of the portable case fire and forget?
Yeah. Look, I think, and I spoke about this earlier, I just gave a presentation to a major association on this. When you're creating a case, you're, you know, putting all that information out there for people to review. And if you're culling that data in any way and you're looking at it targeted, there's a lot of targeted collection interest these days. What do you lose? You lose context. You lose the ability to understand, hey, if I just go after iMessage and somebody's, communicating with Signal or Telegram with that same person, am I going to get that context? Sure, you want to grab and go. I did an article about this in the book with John Rowe from Pinpoint Labs. It's not just about grabbing and going. It's about understanding that you need to keep the forensic foundations in there. Everybody's saying, well, what's the best case scenario of a cell phone collection? Is it that we always want to collect everything? Well, no, you don't have to. But the thing is, you don't have to bother anybody again when you do this. You have everything, that you have a snapshot in time. If you create a portable case and that has the data that's relevant that everybody wants today, what's going to happen when somebody, that matter turns in from an e-discovery case to a forensic investigation? And you didn't have that opportunity to do it. Same thing right now. We've had the ability to go from a, advanced logical image or an advanced logical collection. I never call cell phone collections images, but a advanced logical collection to now a full file system collection. What are the advantages? If you're working a case that has accident reconstruction and you want to see everything that's been going on to tell the full picture, that's great. But if you're just focused in on, was Johnny text messaging when the car hit the barrier on the side of the road, you're not going to get that context. Take a step back, look at it from the overall perspective of what your end goal is and what you're trying to achieve, and figure out, is that portable case the best way to look at this? Okay. Is that portable case going to take you from where, you were planning all this stuff out to now having all the information you need at that specific point in time? There's a lot of contentious cases that I work on where I'm being asked to look at documents and they say to me, tell me the metadata and the origin of this document. And I'm going to say, if I don't know the folder path that came from or the computer that came from to tell you the full picture, I'm not going to be able to give you a true opinion on this based on very limited information. Sure, you can give me a portable case with just those text messages or just those documents, but there's a bigger picture that may need to be, discussed here. And that may be my knowledge. If I don't have that knowledge to question and be intuitive, inquisitive about it, I'm not going to be able to effectively assist my client. And that's where that investigative experience comes in. Nobody's going to be able to tell me when I click on that button, do a metadata analysis in any of my tools, this is the metadata. Sure, it's black and white, but do I know to ask the right questions to say, where may other versions of those documents exist? And those text messages that I have in my portable case, are those the only text messages that may be out there? Or does a backup exist in the cloud, on a local device, right? You have to have these experiences to be able to ask. And if you read any of the chapters in my book, I ask those types of questions, and I don't answer all the questions. I give you that mindset of how you need to approach these things to get the most information given the scenario that you've encountered.
Awesome. We are approaching the 1 hour mark, but I kind of want to open up the floor to kind of a general anything that you feel like you would like to say, cover, self promote, even based on the stuff that we've talked about, or anything that you think we've missed.
Yeah, look, Justin, I really appreciate you reaching out. We all do things, to you know, show that we're passionate about things, and some of us have different outlets. I've always enjoyed writing. This has been something written a book on my family history, um, you know, 11, 12 years ago. When I thought about putting things down, I even have an e-course. It started off as an e-course, all this writing, and then it turned out to be, compilations and books. I do things on the basis of I've been fortunate enough to have a career where I wasn't a law enforcement officer, right? I had an idea of going into federal agencies. I had all those connections. I wanted to live at home, and be close to New York and those opportunities. And I grew up in this industry to be surrounded by really great people, some of which we know, amongst each other. So those people have been really like family to me. And I can call up folks like Rob Atto, Rob Maddox, Mark Stringer. I mean, people who have been in this industry, Wade Grant, these are like brothers and family members to me. We all took the time to learn this stuff in a way that we are able to communicate it to law enforcement. Now we're all in our own ways, still in the industry in different avenues. But the one thing that's always been in my thought is to always continue educating others. Every time I got on a plane when I was teaching law enforcement, I was like, that's a mission that I'm going on. It's not just a job to me, it's a mission. My mission right now is not so much to be, the best of the best of, all these different topics I'm presenting to people. I want to raise awareness. I've been fortunate to become a PI. I want to give back to the PI world. I had gotten denied when I first applied for my PI license 8 years ago. Now I'm writing for PI Magazine. I'm being approached from PIs all over the United States to help with things. E-discovery. I didn't start off in e-discovery. I started off, teaching law enforcement fully in digital forensics. Now I'm being approached to help out on the e-discovery side. Digital forensics, sure, I've got the people that, I know for many years. Forensic science, I work closely with the Henry Lee C. Lee Institute of Forensic Science as a fellow, helping them out on these areas as well. Your knowledge is really important. Your knowledge needs to be maintained by maintaining great connections. And when you reached out and said, hey, let's have a conversation, it wasn't about, where we are in our careers. It's about you have a medium in which you give people the opportunity to present a little bit about their interests and what they do. And I think it's a great thing to bring it out to people. Where are we every day? What are we doing? And a couple, months back, I reached out to somebody on LinkedIn. I said, I never spoke to you before. Let's have a conversation. That person actually wrote and said, this was like the most unique part of my day. I connected with somebody, we talked about our, things. We found synergies there. And we're a small community. And sometimes we don't take the time beyond conferences to really get to know each other. But I appreciate you wanting to get to know me a little bit. And we've crossed paths, through your time at Xterra, at Access Data. And I really appreciate the opportunity. I do this for the purpose of giving people information that's trusted. When you Google, you get to get information. When you're dealing with somebody who's done this for 20 years and is giving you information, it's a little bit of trust associated with it. I do it in video format, in e-courses, in things that make you go, and I also do it in a symposium I put on every year with Dr. Henry Lee, who is one of the foremost forensic scientists in the world, who actually happened to have been my professor. And I've done 2 successful events. Last year we had 100 people attend. This year I hope to have more. But I bring together experts from all over based on the years that I've been doing this for the good of everybody who wants to listen in. And I appreciate all the support for you to bring me on here, for people who read my book. And I just encourage you to look at the content. I think it'd be some of the best, $6 to $12 you'll spend. And the hardcover is absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't have been more happy when I got this at home to have this book and my thoughts on paper to share with everybody who wants to have a listen.
Well, I agree with all that. Fantastic listen for me, but a fantastic read, and I think has a lot of helpful tips and I think perspectives of the way you can look at your investigations. So, Rob, thanks for jumping on today. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.